Hi there, welcome. I'm Bob Thompson, and I'd like to welcome you to the Philanthropic Planner Program. We've been doing this for quite some time, and we start off with the Chronicle, the Philanthropic magazine here, and we talk about philanthropy. And I get people that ask me, why do you put on such a boring show about a boring subject? So we try not to have a boring show, even though it's a boring subject. Philanthropy. Well, we see a need for talking about philanthropy, and we've been doing this for 10 or 11 years, and this particular issue of the Chronicle of Philanthropy, if you can see it, kind of spooky hands, is about artificial intelligence and how most of this issue relates to how large charities, universities, hospitals, museums, and so on, are looking to artificial intelligence and this mysterious cloud cover that we have, and how to utilize what's out there in the tech world to help charities stay in contact with donors. And really, it's an interesting area. I'm not a techie. I don't profess to know anything about it. The people at the office and my wife at home, they know I'm not a techie. Turn it on, turn it off, and anything that happens in between. How's this happen? How's this work? Anyway, I struggle with the title or heading of these programs, and artificial intelligence. Okay, how do we utilize that? So we kind of honed in on meaningful dialogue, the un-AI, the un-artificial intelligence of giving. So we'll get into that a little bit, but I thought meaningful dialogue probably is primary in what we're talking about if we're talking about artificial intelligence, but really meaningful dialogue to me is more important in a lot of respects. We've got a lot to cover, and I could spend probably an hour and a half of a program on the Chronicle and some of the issues that from month to month are in that publication. But you know, the news out there in philanthropy, for a lot of reasons. We're coming toward the end of the tax season, and I was just mentioning to Karen here in the studio that this tax season, reporting for 2018, is certainly a learning episode or what have you. We're in transition. We're going to find out that the change in the tax laws of doubling the exemptions and how that affected whether you itemize or don't itemize, and how that reflects on giving donations. If I'm not itemizing and I'm thinking, whoa, I don't get a deduction for this, well, what they giveth over here, they taketh away on the other hand. But news-wise, we're seeing in the Chronicle and other publications about philanthropy, about how the mega wealthy, the big donors are impacting charities and impacting really the country and the world with their giving of billions. And I thought I'd share with you Trends in Philanthropy article here, that the nation's biggest donors pouring billions of dollars into philanthropic causes, winning praises from charities on one hand, but also raising concerns that the wealthy may be gaining too much influence in American life. What's that mean? At the same time, experts say 2017 overall overhaul of the U.S. tax law reduced the incentive for small donors to give to charity as it preserved the tax benefits for the wealthy donors. Well, it's just what I was mentioning. If I take away this, does that influence me in giving $100 to this charity or $100 to that charity and not getting a deduction? In the meantime, and we've talked about this before, the growth in donor-advised funds monies, investment accounts where donors can deposit gifts of money, stock, other assets that grow tax-free until the grants are made to charity. It's seeing incredible growth, and part of that is due to professional advisors, accountants, attorneys, financial planners, and so on, is a part of that growth. Some charities don't like this growth because they see that that may, or they perceive, their perception is that it's taking away from charities. Critics worry that such funds lacked sufficient transparency and that billions of dollars are piling up in the accounts instead of being paid out. So there's a lot of talk about regulating the distribution rate, percentage-wise or term of years of donors and donor-advised funds. That's being talked about quite a bit in Washington. In the meantime now, when you and I look at the billions of dollars that are gifted for whatever, okay, the smaller donor in dollars, millennials, for example, millennials are steering away from the traditional giving, and instead of, they are volunteering more, and they're starting their own nonprofits, which is interesting. We are seeing some of that in our community here, where not just millennials, but donors, well-intended, have the capacity, and they are contributing to local charities, or they're starting their own nonprofit, and we're seeing quite a bit of that. We need to, at the same time, and we'll talk about this in a minute, about steering and partnering, if you will, with corporations in the private sector. So we are seeing a trend in philanthropy where the three-legged stool that Alexa de Tocqueville talked about, private, public, and philanthropic, where we're seeing more dialogue with the three. I'll give you an example, opportunity zones, for example. We're talking about big money, and we're talking about governmental legislation where people with unrealized capital gains can devote and invest these monies over into opportunity zones. And these opportunity zones are designated to where there's a tax benefit in not realizing tax-wise that unrealized gain. And now we're seeing that charities are also interested in participating and partnering, if you will, similar to this opportunity zone area, where the endowments, the investments of the charitable endowments are now partnering with investments in the private sector and even in the hedge fund arena. So there's a lot of things happening in the philanthropic world, and that's for the good. The not so good is, are we ignoring local, smaller charities? And those of you that may have seen a couple programs ago about the Chronicle of Philanthropy talking about large cities benefiting. And I'm saying, okay, and I wrote a letter to the editor about it's not just the large cities. The largest, in that particular issue, talked about the 5 or 6 largest cities in the country. I'm saying, how about the small community that needs some of these charitable dollars? And we just need to talk about that. Now, let's come back to the heading or title of our program, Meaningful Dialogue. Unlike the artificial intelligence effort, where I have a charity, let's say a university, and I have 280,000 constituents that we have to communicate and solicit and raise campaign dollars. Well, how does a staff of 50, 60, 90 in our development office communicate with 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 in the constituency? That's where the need for this artificial intelligence comes. But I want to bring you back and devote the rest of our program to this meaningful dialogue approach that I'm taking here. I had the opportunity, and I certainly appreciated and benefited a great deal by being invited to a local program at our Simsbury Library. And this was 2 weeks ago, and it happened to be sponsored by the Hartford Foundation of Public Giving. And I've been trying, not a secret now, but I've been trying to contact the new president of the Hartford Foundation, Jay Williams, and see if he would be interested in being a guest on our program. Well, the news out, and I'll share this with you, is that Jay could not be a guest at this program, but next month he has graciously accepted the invitation, and I'm so glad that Jay can be on our next program. But let's come back to the library meeting. Well attended. There were a large number in attendance for this library meeting, and the purpose of the meeting was to announce, not just, it was a communication to the local community about the good, the state of the Hartford Foundation and what they've been doing. And over the years, the growth. Hartford Foundation is one of the older community foundations in the country, but a large effort in communities and doling out a lot of grants through the years. So part of it was communication of the good that Hartford Foundation is doing. The other part was, I think, as meaningful of anything that I've heard, and I don't know if this is attributable to Jay Williams and new blood and fresh ideas and so on, but I compliment the board of the Hartford Foundation for initiating an effort in the Hartford region, the Hartford Foundation's region, where the incentive to fund $100,000 for each of these communities, 22 towns or whatever, $100,000. And part of the purpose of the meeting was to hear from residents, to hear from people in the community what they think is a need for potential grants that might come from the Hartford Foundation or from private foundations or giving or whatever. So I thought that particular initiative was very meaningful because it relates to the local community. Now, you really, really have to go back and stretch. But when we talk about the local community, I came out and looked at an old magazine called The American Benefactor. Now, believe me, this goes back a while, in fact, 22 years. And our planning company advertised for a number of years in The American Benefactor. And I was reflecting on an ad that we have in this magazine. And if I can put my fingers on it now, my kingdom for a paperclip for the ad. And when we first started off with this program, the Philanthropic Planner, I referred to this magazine. And again, it may not be the same issue, but I referred to the ad that's in the publication. And I kind of liked the ad because my wife Norma designed the content and the art. and the picture of a New England town. Charity begins at home. Home is where the heart is. The heart is in the community. So if we bring this into what I'm trying to make as an emphasis and a theme, is that the local community is where a lot of our philanthropic efforts should be. It should be directed to the needs of the local community. So when we talk about this public library meeting and soliciting input from residents in the community as to where they might think a meaningful grant might be applied, to me, that is meaningful dialogue. Now let's come back to why do we produce this program? I usually start off and say, well, we do this to have a friendly forum to promote meaningful dialogue of the importance of philanthropy to the local community. That's the mission, that's the vision that we have in having the program, to promote meaningful dialogue. Well, the heading on our program today, meaningful dialogue. It was, to me, a significant improvement in an effort, in this case by the Hartford Foundation, to go out to the local communities and say, we're not going to depend on individual, unsolicited, perhaps, grant requests, and then sit in, not an ivory tower, I don't mean it that way, but sit in an office and maybe in downtown Hartford and look at numerous, dozens, hundreds of grant requests and not know anything about the reason for the grant necessarily, other than I can read it like an application. So meaningful dialogue in that respect is very important. Now, let me jump ahead to another meeting just recently in the last week. And the Hartford Foundation Public Giving was also involved in this, and I don't know how I got the invitation, but I have a couple of clients that said to me, and they've said in the past, are you familiar with the Catalyst Endowment Foundation? No. And I should be. I should have been aware of this, but it took a couple of our clients to bring that name to our attention and say, if you ever get an opportunity to go to their meetings, do that. Well, I received an invitation. I don't know who was listening in the walls, but I received an invitation to go to their meeting in Hartford. And the Catalyst Foundation is, if I define it in this way and the way I understand these things, and I've talked about giving circles. And in fact, I devoted one of our programs in the past to a friend in Cincinnati, Sally Allspaw, and she invited the founders of the Giving Circle in Cincinnati, and very quickly it started with 100 women in Greater Cincinnati, and they contributed $1,000 a year. And the 100 donors would get together several times a year and determine where this money was going to go, 100. And it grew to 150. Now, I don't know how many are members now, but a giving circle is a group with a kindred spirit that's common to the local community, but they were the ones that had meaningful dialogue and solicited their friends, neighbors, relatives, families, or whatever, why don't you join this group? And we have a membership, and the membership is really designed to fund this endowment, kind of, and then we will decide and vote on where this money goes and the grants that we receive. To me, the underlying pillar, if you will, of a giving circle is to have people sharing ideas, meaningful dialogue, to say, have you heard about this charity? They are doing wonderful, wonderful things. And if that wasn't word of mouth out there, and the power of word of mouth gets out there. The last couple of programs we talked about healing meals. And in fact, we had the founders of Healing Meals in saying, here's a concept, here's a vision, here's what we want to do. And then 2 or 3 years later, seeing thousands, 15,000 meals given out from this vision. Well, if it wasn't for word of mouth and getting the word out, they wouldn't have the resource to do the wonderful good that they're doing. So meaningful dialogue to me is charity begins at home. The home is where the heart is. The heart is in the community. Now let's move back to this Catalyst Foundation. This meeting had the subject, and they had 3 professionals that are working with juvenile justice, and the title of the presentation of this program was Breaking the Cycle, Juvenile Justice. So these 3 presenters were talking about one, the problem or problems, and it's a multi-level thing that typical of the need out there, but juvenile justice, and how in some cases juveniles may be doing something stupid as a 14-year-old or 15-year-old or whatever, ending up in prison with felons, and how we need to improve that situation if we can. In fact, not so long ago, there was a prison devoted and dedicated to juvenile detention. So this presentation was breaking the cycle in juvenile justice. And my understanding is that the Catalyst program has different programs, different subjects, and the purpose of having these programs is word of mouth, getting out there and saying, here's the problem, here's the need, here's what we can do. And out of the group that was at that meeting last week, there may be 1 or 2 or 3 donors, in addition to their astronomically large membership fee of $250, that may gift $10,000, something like that. I'm just saying that if we're not aware of the need, if that's not disseminated in such a way, and you're not a large mega charity that can afford to spend not tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands in artificial intelligence to get companies to gather the data for donors and say, here's how we approach and communicate and cultivate and nurture this mega donor, okay? We don't have the luxury of doing that on a local basis. So I'm saying that we need, and I have accolades and stars for the Hartford Foundation in their recent initiative for $100,000 to each of the small communities in the greater Hartford region, and to promote meaningful dialogue. And I really think that in each one of these areas, you could have a giving circle, and perhaps there should be a matching program that in the giving circle, maybe the Hartford Foundation or some other personal or private foundations would match that giving circle, and you'd get the strength from the combination of those efforts. But to me, it's a relatively new concept, the giving circle, in this area of the country. In other parts of the country, I mentioned Cincinnati, but in the Midwest in particular, there are cities that have giving circles, and they've been thriving successfully over the last 8, 10, 15 years and doing good in their local communities. We just need to get these things away from close to the vest where we don't talk about, and I don't talk about my charity and different subject, let's change. We need this meaningful dialogue, and I think it's vitally important. Talk about capacity. I was reminded here a couple of weeks ago of a donor that had a large amount of, happened to be Cigna stock in our backyard, receiving no dividend at all. And I made a presentation recently on this laddering of charitable gift annuities and used that particular case as an example. Since that time, I've gotten invitations for other presentations, a couple of universities and another large charity, talking about laddering charitable gift annuities on a planned basis. Let's come back to the opportunity zones and what is attractive in that case. Remember I said unrealized capital gains, and how using that particular statute or the ability to avoid taxation on that unrealized capital gain. When we're talking about charitable gift annuities, it's literally the same concept. So we need to talk, we need to have meaningful dialogue when we have people in the community that have the capacity of an asset that is doing literally nothing for them. That there are ways of giving, and we need to talk about the tools. We need to have meaningful dialogue about the many tools out there. So again, I would do more if I could. I would do more if I knew how. If I could is my capacity. Can I gift today and not worry about my need, either healthcare or whatever, my need in the future? Can I gift today my excess cash, my ability, my capacity to give? I would do more if I knew how. Comes back to meaningful dialogue. And it's friends, neighbors, family, professionals sharing with donors that yes, we can do a better job. We can do it with charity starts at home, and the home is where the heart is, and the heart is in the community. So I encourage you, oh, by the way, you could write out a small check to Simsbury Community TV, and it would be greatly appreciated by you and your neighbor viewers in the future. Thanks for tuning in, and Crazy Bob will be back probably we'll be back next month with Jay Williams as a guest at the Hartford Foundation of Public Giving. See you later. Thanks.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.